We are already live. So hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Canna Monitor webinar. This edition, very special one with Rubén Valenzuela, our mate from Barcelona as well. It's a pleasure having you here, Rubén. How are you doing today?
Really good, Arnau. The pleasure is mine. I've been looking to be with you for a long time, so I'm so happy today to be here.
Amazing. And it's a little bit of a different webinar than the ones we do usually, because usually we cover particular markets. And today we are taking a more broader look, I would say, at the infrastructure of the industry. Because of course, in all the regulated markets, no matter if they are medicinal, recreational, hemp, etc., product testing is so important. It defines a lot of the market characteristics. So we are going to look at analytics data from different lab analysis, all around the world. So I think it can be a really interesting conversation today. And of course, we have Rubén, which is a great person to be discussing this because he's an agricultural engineer. He's an industrial engineer. He has been in the industry for so many years, over a decade, I believe. He's the founder of the Cannabis Hub in Barcelona, an industry association in Spain. And also he's the founder of Valemberas, which is portable lab technology that we are going to explain in more detail later. So I think it's a highly relevant discussion and I'm looking forward to having it. Do you have any preliminary thoughts, Rubén, or do you want to go straight into it?
Just to mention, that I think is in other industries, the content of alcohol is really common and it's the same one in many in other countries. But actually, because we are in a young industry and it's still germinating, I think there is a huge challenge, in the way that we analyze, how we analyze, which are the standard protocols, and how this is affecting the industry, all the inflation that we are going to see, and many of the factors that are really altering the industry, and it's really important. And I think we could address in a single hour with all the topics and really information that I think is going to be really interesting for everyone. So as I said before, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and let's talk about all the information.
Let's do it. Absolutely. We have 1 hour as always. And at the end, we want to have some space for Q&A. Don't forget to write your comments in the chat as they appear, because we're going to address them at the end. We have a packed session, about 5 minutes per slide, so we cannot sleep. And we're going to cover so much ground. So first, we're going to talk about some of the main trends that we are seeing on testing. So for instance, THC inflation, as Rubén was mentioning. We're going to also show some of what the product testing shows us in terms of terpene data, for instance. And finally, we're going to finish with some ideas on how the testing, scalable testing, let's say, with devices such as the NIR that Valemberas offers, can help producers, scale their testing approaches on the field. So without further ado, let's go into the presentation of today. We're going to start with the metaphor of the iceberg, which means that, of course, we have a lot of data that is relevant for cannabis products that we can measure, perhaps. But, however, due to regulatory reasons and perhaps even due to cannabinoid science, how it has been evolved, what we look mostly in terms of product analytics is at the main cannabinoids, so particularly THC, which is the king in the market, as we are going to see later. We also look usually at the CBD. And of course, in most cases, we have one strain name, which might or might not fit the actual genetic composition of the genetics of the plant. But then when we're going into, let's say, more advanced analytics, the information becomes a little bit more difficult to see. It's usually not labeled on the product. Sometimes it's not on the certificate of analysis, at least on the regulatory mandated one. Or then when we are going, for instance, into the genotype or the chemobar, the difficulties to standardize this data and have it accessible all over the world are very, very difficult. Other problems that are beyond the surface of the analytics landscape, let's say, are, for instance, interlab variability. We're going to see later that some labs can test actually quite differently. And this also affects how the market is shaped, because often producers or distributors like to have a higher THC content. So this plays into the lab shopping dynamic in some cases. But we also have a multiplicity of standards that are applied and that can render different results. And of course, we have all the cultivation control, quality assurance before the mandated GMP product release, and so on, which needs to be measured and is usually, even though it's not a regulatory requirement often, this is also relevant data that shapes how the product evolves during the supply chain, including in processing, in storage, etc., etc. So even though we could have potentially a wide variety of data points relevant in terms of the supply chain and in terms of the information available ultimately to patients and to consumers, it's usually reduced to the main cannabinoids and particularly to THC. So Ruben, you have been, of course, in the industry for so many years, and I believe some of this is why you decided to set up Valemberas. So in your opinion, what are the main challenges in terms of product analytics that we have in the industry right now?
Right, thank you. So basically, the point that I see and actually has been a topic is we're talking about a plan. This is not a pill. This is not an extraction in terms of talking about the flower. And mainly what we've been seeing is that it's impossible to say this plant is a 20% THC once we have a huge variation depending on the top of the plant, the lower part of the plant, and how it's cultivated. This is one of the points, no? So trying to figure it out, how we are going to say this is not a wine that we actually have a common group of, let's say, of components. It's a variation of different flowers that this is going to affect. So this is why, for example, UGMP set or has the regulation that says that if you say that it's 20%, you can only have 10% of variation. So the flowers should be between 18 and 22. This is not an easy game. And we need to think about EU GMP, why, no, and why, whatever. If we jump into that, then we see standardizations, and then we actually have ISO 17025. We actually, when we started in Valemberas 7 years ago, we did an interlab study, taking into account 3 same samples, as we're going to see later on, in different labs. Then we actually realized that this variation that was 5% according to the regulation that should be approved by Interlab only happens when we had an ISO 17025 lab. But the ISO 17025 is only in potency, still is not in terpenes, nor in other types of information that we have. That's another point that is a challenge, and then we are facing how it's going to be. And for me, the third one and really important one is the environment. No, so we were talking, I remember 3 years ago in the C days by the Cannabis Hub in Barcelona, the University of Barcelona, which is the impact of an indoor flower. And I think people does not know that. And I think this is a super important value. No, usually cannabis users, they take care of the environment. They really like to take care of the earth, but then they don't know how is the impact, the CO2 that is produced to generate 1 gram of cannabis is huge. So I think if we would be able to know more information about all these components, people would like to change the way that they consume. So by myself, I usually prefer to have outdoor flowers just because I know the impact is way lower. You know, it's actually good for the environment. And then compared to the indoor flowers, which is actually not really good. I love indoor flowers, and they are really strong, nice, compact, but at the end I think there are going to be new ways. So for example, flavonoids, we've been studying if we can integrate flavonoids into our system. It's going to come, and I think many other ones. So there are many components that I think that we still don't know, and they are going to come, but I think there are challenges. As I said before, we are germinating. This industry is really young, but still I think it's something like we need to look into that. And I wish to have in future, not only the THC, the CBD, and perhaps some of the terpenes, why not, the CO2 that has been used, to produce that flowers, and many other factors that are going to be related to this flower. Let's see. I think this is a mission that we have, and hopefully we will just push, the industry in order to have the proper information for consumers.
That's so interesting, Ruben. And actually, what I gather is that we have some technological challenges in terms of, for instance, what you mentioned regarding the flavonoids, but also, let's say, some challenges that have to do with the genetic variability and the biological diversity of cannabis as opposed to other crops, perhaps. So it's particularly interesting in the cannabis industry. You could say this technology and the product testing, I would say, is key in such an industry with so much variability in terms of products. However, when it comes to how most of the patients often, but also along the supply chain, the retailers, the distributors, etc., decide which products to carry. We see that THC is still one of the key metrics. And actually in this slide, we are showing some data recently published by Bloomwell, which is one market operator in Germany. It doesn't need to reflect the whole market, the data that we are showing, but it's not that different to the whole market based on other data points that I've seen. And what we see is that when legalization was enacted in Germany in April 2024, the average THC content in flower sold in the pharmacies was around 20%, maybe even slightly less than 20%. And we see that particularly after legalization, there was a big explosion in the number of SKUs launched into the market, and many of those SKUs were very, very high potency. And right now, as of 2026, we see that the average potency in German flower, it's closer to 25%. It oscillates a little bit up and down based on the products that are available and that are selling better or worse. But we see that if we look at the bottom graph, even some categories that used to exist, let's say 10 to 18% THC, which is actually the average THC content in flower in the illicit market, by the way, both in Germany, in the Netherlands, or in Spain, it tends to be around 16%. But these varieties have almost completely disappeared in terms of sales in the pharmacy. Most of the distributors, what they want to carry are varieties 25% or above. And we see that the patients, perhaps because it's the main reference that they have in terms of the quality of the product, they really also use it, and it's a big driver of sales. And therefore, THC inflation, also you can sell the products for a higher price, by the way. And also in terms of the price per milligram, this also needs to be computed, because if it's more potent, of course, you're getting more active ingredient per gram of product that you purchase. But we see that tea inflation is a long-standing trend in the industry, I would say. If we look, and later we'll look at data from the United States or even in Canada, we see that the average is even higher, closer to 28 or 30% even THC as it is labeled on the products. And in Europe, this is still earlier in the maturity phase, I would say, but it's also a big driver of the market. So Ruben, you were saying before that you think that THC shouldn't be the only metric, but what's your assessment of THC inflation, and do you think the industry can move beyond THC inflation?
That's a good question. So basically, I would like to take into account the history of the cannabis. And according to data in the 60s, we used to have up to 6-7% of THC in flowers, and actually was the normal, no? And this happened as well with other industries. In any case, we were breeding and finding the way to have higher levels. And as we were taking and talking about before, no, like, I don't know, if we compare, and I don't like to compare it with alcohol because I think it's a way worse substance. In any case, if you are going to buy any kind of alcohol or wine, you are going to look into the flavor, where it's grown, which are different components, not only the content of alcohol, because at the end, that doesn't have any sense. Why? Because it's a mature industry. We are talking a really new industry, and then at the end, people is looking for the high, no? So then we see how, or which is the way that people is consuming. In that way, people is trying to get high, and then they just look into the THC and how it's moving on. My experience with Valenveras is that, we have many clients in all the world, but we visit many trade shows and facilities, and then it's actually a way to see how mature is the market. We find the highest THC levels with the Valenveras unit in Canada, which I think is the most mature market in the world. And then later on is United States. Compared, for example, I don't want to say whatever, but for example, Chile, we did, so usually when we go to the trade shows, we offer our analysis to everyone, no? And at the end, we have data of many things. So many of the companies that we collab give, there is like a contest, no? Which is going to be the highest content of THC. Suddenly, after a trade show with more than 300 samples in Chile, the winner was at 23%, no? And they were like, wow, it's not that bad. Then suddenly we moved from there to Vancouver to the trade show, and the minimum one that we found up to 200 samples was at 26. That was like, what? Even the minimum, the maximum was 34, which is one of the top ones that we have in the model. So at the end, it's also a matter of seeing how mature is the market, and in any case, how this inflation is going on. In any case, personally, I rather prefer to have ratio 1:1, so THC CBD strains. And at the end, and most of I think the future, or at least what I would like to see, is our strains that are 7, 8, 11%, that I love them. In any case, as I was talking, it's like kind of a competition, and it looks like a competition. And then not only the grower and the producer that is saying, okay, I want to have the top THC product. Instead of thinking about, hey, I want to have the best flavor, I'm going to grow living soil, I'm going to do something. No, they are trying to just reach the higher level of THC. Also the consumer, if you see, and actually in many dispensaries and even in the telemedicine, as we were showing, people is looking for the highest one, and then find a way for that. I think we need to have time in the industry to mature that, and to what we were talking, find other components. Why not total content of terpenes? Why not if it's bio or not? No, still there is not bio certification in the cannabis industry. Many other factors that we are going to see. So at the end, just looking and comparing to the alcohol industry, once I go to buy a wine, for example, I like to check where it comes from, if it's bio, and more or less which are the components that are inside, not only the content of alcohol, which actually I don't even look into the alcohol content. So I think this is just a matter of time that we are going to see evolving the industry, and I'm so curious to see how it's going to be.
Okay, very interesting comments, Ruben. Actually, what I wanted to see next, and you mentioned that the United States goes after Canada in terms of maturity. I assume it also changes a lot depending on the state. This is a study carried out last year in Colorado, and actually they compared the tested, as it was shown in the labels of regulated products in dispensaries in Colorado, compared to their own analysis that they ran. And of course, this surfaced some differences, and actually particularly for the flower, interestingly, rather than for the concentrates. So on the bottom right, we see the distribution of the difference between what the researchers measured and the labeled content of THC in the products, and we see that there's a big variability, perhaps because of factors like Ruben mentioned before, in terms of how you do the sampling and so on, but also there can be some methods questions, I guess, by the different labs, and this is evidenced because the distribution above and below the THC is not symmetrical. No, if it was a pure statistical error, perhaps we would expect a normal distribution, but we see that of the 178 flowers that were analyzed, 57% were correctly labeled, but of this 40-something% that was incorrectly labeled, most of those were over-labeled rather than under-labeled, because of course, in the vacuum, having higher THC is allegedly better. No, if you don't have the information like Ruben was mentioning in terms of what are the terpene profiles, how has it been produced, etc., etc. Perhaps if we had this info, then the THC content could be a little bit more nuanced, at least in the eyes along the supply chain or in the eyes of the consumers. So, Ruben, you are now traveling a lot to many conferences, also in the States. So, what's your view on this? Let's say lab shopping dilemmas that often producers face, and what have you seen in your travels?
Good. So I've been seeing, and I don't want to mention any lab that actually closed due to the fact that they inflate the results. What happened in the industry is that basically I'm a producer, and then I actually want to sell my flower. So I send my sample to the lab A and the lab B. The lab A is going to tell me 20.8, and the lab B is going to tell me 22.5. The same, doing the perfect sampling and doing all the homogeneous part that should be done properly. Then suddenly, what I'm going to do as a producer, because later on I'm going to sell that flower, and the flower is the same flower, but one lab is telling me 20 and the one is 22. What I'm going to do, I'm going to send it to the 22 for sure. And that's the problem. What happened is that many labs start seeing that and deciding, oh, wow, we are having that column, but at the end, the ISO 1724 allow me to have this small variation. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell to people 22, even to some people 24, and that happened. So what happened is that people start inflating the results as this study appears, not that at the end, most of the labs, they were tricking a bit sometimes and then trying to get more clients due to the fact that they inflate the results. And actually, really curious to see. I started working in the cannabis industry in 2010 in BioBith, and then in 2017 we started seeing the CBD industry in Switzerland. It was Oregon, but then Switzerland, and then in the CBD industry it was the opposite. So if I would sell my flower with, in that case, the regulation has been changing a lot, but let's say the limitation in Italy was 0.6%, then suddenly if I send my flower to a lab A that tells me 0.6 and the lab B that is going to tell me 1%, no, I don't want to have 1%. It's the same flower, but one is telling me 0.6 and the other one is 1%. So what happened? And then in the CBD industry, they de-inflate their results. So at the end, what we are seeing is that lab sometimes has been playing a role in terms of saying what the client wants just in order to be the best lab or the lab that is chosen by the industry. What happened, and in mature countries, in mature markets, like for example, California, and I don't want to mention any concrete lab, they close to the reality that they have been showing that they inflate the results, and at the end, they have not been validated by the government as a third lab validation. So you want to trick the game, you trick for a while, but it's going to be at the end, the truth is going to come. And I understand it. I think it's, again, it's a really new market, and still we need to have many more regulations, specifically in terms of being able to validate it. There is one of the things that you mentioned before that are inter-lab tests. We are running right now with Valenberg as an inter-lab test. And later on, we will talk about the NIR and the difference with HPLC or GCMS. But at the end, I think we should find a way why the alcohol is the same. And I don't want to compare with alcohol, but I think it's really, really easy for people to understand. It's the same value in all the places, and no one is going to change the alcohol value of my vodka to sell it more. I don't know. So, hey, let's try to see the evolution of the market. And what I think is important by the government is try to figure it out and do this kind of studies to see and to show that labs are actually doing the proper work and actually saying what is really in the cannabis and in the labels. I understand that it's easy, to try to trick and to see, but I would not, risk my lab just to try to get more clients. I rather prefer to have a proper work done and then going into the truth.
Okay, that's very interesting, Ruben. And actually, beyond the interest, let's say, of the labs and the operators to have higher THC content, we also have the natural variability in the plant. And this was shown wonderfully by this analysis by our friends of Cannalytics in Washington State, but based on data from New York, which I would say is one of the less mature markets in the States, just for reference in terms of the data that we're showing. And we see in this case 3 varieties that are compared. On the first graph, actually, on the top left, we see the different results, the average THC results shown by different labs in New York State. And we see that the top lab has an average of 28.6 and the lower 23.5 in the case of New York. This might have to do with difference in their clients. Let's say if the one that shows has more clients that are, let's say, greenhouse growers as opposed to indoor growers, this could explain part of the difference. So the fact that it's different average doesn't imply that they are doing anything wrong. This should be very clear. However, it's still interesting that we have such a big difference, let's say, between the average, which we see in New York last year was around 25%. So let's say slightly more mature than Germany, but not that much in this sense. But we see that it ranges, I would say, 10% above and 10% below, which is not crazy, but it's certainly a wide distribution. But then if we look at particular varieties, which is what we are seeing in the other graphs, we see that there's also a big variability, no? And this might be explained, sure, due to cultivation differences in cultivation techniques, for instance, between different operators, but also because the strain name doesn't necessarily reflect the same genetic material, of course. So Blue Dream, which is a very established variety in the States that they really love, we see that actually is one of that has a lot more dispersion in the results in the graph in the top right compared to, for instance, Jet Fuel Gelato or Alien Pebbles in this case, which is relevant. It might point that there's either way different cultivation methods used for this variety, but also potentially a lot of differences in the actual genetics that are being grown by different operators, and so on. And we see that the distribution, let's say, is also different for each strain, which also shows interesting dynamics. In this case, these 3 varieties were taken from the lab tests conducted by Pure Sun Farms, which is a Canadian public company. So yeah, Ruben, what beyond the lab shopping issue, like how does biology and the cultivation method and so on impact these factors that we are discussing?
Good. So there are a few paper research as well that has been shown the difference on flower potency in the flowers in a plant depends on many factors, but could change up to 40%. Let's say that one top flower or lower flower, depending on the strain, could be 20%, but then you can find a flower of 12-14%. And that's a key point. Also related of the challenge, that many companies have once, as I was mentioning, they want to be in this 10% of variation. So let's say if I'm selling a flower that is 20%, it should be between 18 and 22. This is not an easy game. So you need to have a proper structure of the plant. You need to control properly all the conditions in order to have, let's say, like a cannabis that is a pill, and trying to find these GMP standards that are really complicated. This is one of the points, and I think this is a huge challenge that we don't see in other industries, or not as we see. Let's say it's a big challenge in once we are talking about GMP, because at the end this is not a pill, this is not an extraction. If we are talking about flowers, it's really complex to have an apple that is always the same sweet, the same apple that is going to be in one part of the tree or another one. That's one of the points. Another thing is what you were mentioning before, is that actually people say, hey, this is a blue dream. Okay, but how I know that this is a blue dream? Because, for example, if you are smoking, I don't know, there's typical, I don't know, a Kush, whatever, it could be the same blue dream or the same Kush, but we still don't have DNA markers properly in the industry that can show that this is the blue dream. And actually, even some people, that this happens a lot in the black market, specifically, for example, in Spain, that we have amnesia, or even in the Netherlands, when the old coffee shops were selling amnesia, and there were later on different kind of amnesia, but at the end, which is the real amnesia? There is any no way to share and to know which is specifically this strain. That, for example, in the alcohol industry, a Cabernet or any of the wine strains that have been used, they have the control of the genetics and the way to know that this is a specific strain. Again, there are many factors that are going to be changing as well. It depends if it's going to be outdoor or indoor. It's going to depend if it's going to be hydro or if it's going to be a living soil. There are a million factors that are altering that. At the end, I think the important part of the industry, as many of the states in the United States are doing, is to give us a range. I don't want to see a value that tells me this is 20%. For example, if I'm buying an orange, the proper way to say is that this orange is between, let's say, 3 and 4% of vitamin C. Not 3.2, because it's never going to be exactly depending on the orange that you are taking. So I think we should move into that, in a range of how the strain is going to be. And I think there are many, many, many factors that could alter that as we were talking. But yeah, it's super, super interesting, to see the variation and how it's going to be, depending where you grow.
And then we'll look also into the terpene profiles, with, I guess they also play into this, no, Ruben? Like, in the sense that maybe some strains are associated with particular terpene profiles, but not entirely. Like,
some yes, some not, and basically, what at least what I've been realizing and studying, that this is crazy. Last time we were in Canada, we were comparing some of the results of the Valenveras unit, and they told me, oh, we can reach up to 7% of terpenes. Like, what? But this is a wet flower or is that dry flower? No, it's a dry flower. And like, what? No, we never saw that. Actually, our values and many of the papers they show is up to 3.5. And usually when we have 7 or 8% is in wet flower. So then What happened again is that there is no ISO 17025 protocol for terpenes, and I have been suffering that a lot. Basically, because our system, we are validated with 2 labs, with SC labs in the United States, and then we actually match with our lab CITAIs in Spain, and they was not matching. We sent the same 10 samples to one lab and to another one. Most of the main ones, yes, but then the small ones, and there's some that appears in ones and another one. So I think still we really need ISO 17025 to have a standard protocol. Said that, for sure, there are some commons, and what I understood after studying the terpenes for a long time, I was really lucky to work with Sovereign Fields. Oyer did all his PhD only in terpenes, and then we were analyzing a lot of them in different ways, is that there are like, let's say 10, 12 of them that it appears in the 90% of the cases, 95% of the cases as the most relevant ones. And actually, if you go California in the label, they ask you to have total THC, total CBD, total terpenes, and the 3 main ones. So if you check the labels, you will see 95% of the labels, they always show these 10 ones. And then later on, we can talk about the challenge that we have with NIR, because the challenge of the NIR is that we cannot see less than, let's say, 0.5, 0.1%, depending on the components. And many of the terpenes are really, really small quantities. So that's one of the challenges. We can jump into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to discuss more about terpenes later. But first, let's take a step back. Now we have shown the main challenges in the landscape, let's say, of analytics. But then let's look at which methods we have to actually analyze it. Of course, I'm a market data guy, so this is not my specialty. Bear with me. Hopefully, we have Ruben to also walk us through that. But essentially, we have gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, that are these big, bulky machines, fairly expensive, and also running tests on this machine takes a little while. So this is mostly what is used by the labs that are either GMP accredited or not, but used, let's say, for the official product analytics and certificate of analysis for batch release and so on. But then we have other, let's say, more novel methods such as the NIR, which exists in benchtop version, or like Balenvera's in portable version, which as we can see, it's a fairly cheaper alternative, let's say 1/10 or 1/20 of the cost of the gas chromatography machines. And also it's much faster analysis, so it's more suitable to, let's say, field applications. Is this description fair, Ruben? And what can you tell us about this landscape of methods to analyze samples in cannabis?
Right. So basically, and just to be clear, since the start, we learned from GCMS and HPLC. We are talking about potency and flowers, terpenes. Later on, with the nutrition on the plant, that is a revolution that we are doing with NIR, is an ICP and a nitrogen analyzer. Based on that, I would say we always gonna need HPLC and GCMS to see really small values. What happened is that it's gonna depend on many factors. ISO 17025 is gonna just specify how the sample is gonna be treated, how it's gonna be filtered, how it's gonna be processed with the columns, and how we are gonna be analyzing all that information with the techniques that we use. So there is always gonna be need, I think, the HPLC or the GCMS in terms of seeing really small things and then to validate the system. What happened is that the process is really long, it costs a lot, and I think it's a matter of time that NIR and new technologies are going to be replacing as many other things in life. So I don't want to, I think it's like, for example, mail. 20 years ago, if you would tell my grandma, hey, you are not going to receive any more letters or mails, it's going to be an email, and it's going to be like, what? No, I don't want that. It's not precise, it's going to not reach, and at the end, this is something that is going to come. So if we can look into the table, and just to mention some of the challenge that we've been facing, in Balenvera's, we start using benchtop NIRs, really expensive, really difficult to move, and accurate, but not that different as the portable that we have. In any case, any of the companies that are thinking to have an internal control and they are thinking about buying a HPLC or GCMS is a big challenge. It's a challenge, the maintenance is a challenge, also the technicians and the way that you are running the system. This is something that with the NIR we can jump, and it's never going to be as precise as the HPLC, but we are facing a new era that actually, thanks to AI and many other new tools, we are seeing the efficacy of the NIR. And there is a difference that HPLC, for example, that is the current methodology to know the potency, basically takes 20 minutes to analyze the sample, and to prepare the sample is 10 to 15 minutes. So it's 30 minutes each sample. With the NIR, we can do 211 reads in a second. So it means that in 1 minute we decide 7,000 reads. If we take the budget and we do several reads of the same sample, we are reaching similar accuracy. And it's just a matter of time that we are going to be releasing a new paper with an interlab test that we are doing right now in order to show, that the email is good and you don't need to receive a letter in your post, as you can know the potency of the cannabis with an NIR. So let's see. One of the things that I love compared with other technologies is environmentally friendly. So usually to run an HPLC or GCMS, you are gonna produce a lot of let's say products that are gonna affect environmentally, the earth. With NIR, at the end you're gonna have the system, but once you already build it up, you are not gonna contaminate every time that you do a sample. So as I said before, it's going to be a time that we are going to be seeing, and hopefully soon, how the validation of the NIR is going to come. And in any case, I always would love, I did many analyses with the HPLC and the GCMS, and I would always love to see this small part. So just to say, that as the male, I would like to receive a letter, write it down by hand of my grandma, but day by day I just receive emails, and that's gonna be a matter of time to see this evolution, and I think it's super interesting.
Absolutely. Thank you for the rundown, Ruben. I had some technical issues with the camera, but hopefully that's solved. So now I wanted to focus a little bit more into the method that you developed, which is of course the NIR or NIR. I just know that it uses light to assess the spectrum of the product and predict what its composition is. But of course, it has a lot more things to that. So what can you tell us briefly about the NIR method, about how it works?
Perfect. Briefly, I discovered this methodology in the Agricultural University of Barcelona. They had a chemometric group specialized in analyzing tomato plants and tomatoes with NIR. And actually was freaking out like, hey guys, how you can analyze? Because actually with the HPLC, I did my thesis on ICP, and then usually it takes a lot, as I said, half an hour. And they had a bunch of tomato plants, like I would say more than 10,000, And they told me there is only one way to analyze 10,000 plants in a field and being able to actually breed properly with that is NIR. And I was like, what's that? NIR, near infrared spectroscopy. There is a relation between the absorption of the light and the vibration of the organic molecules. So let's say, imagine that we throw a lot of photons that are balls, and then we see the reflection. This reflection is going to be like this graph that we see here, a fingerprint. After many years and thousands of samples teaching the system where is the absorption of the light relating to the vibration of the organic molecules, we are able to have a prediction that this is the graphic that you see down there. At the end, is just showing to the system, hey, this is the absorption, this is the fingerprint of this flower, and this is the relation with, for example, the content of THC, which is here. And this is basically how we build up the system. The idea is being able to see the reflection of the sample and being able to predict at the end the value of all the components that we do. And basically, this is a technology that is used in many other industries, and this is why I was so motivated to do the company, and I'm really motivated to show to the cannabis industry that it's possible to analyze cannabis with NIR. Problems that we had before, and I still, and thanks to other companies, HemaThread, for example, I had my company and I bought my HemaThread and was not working. Why? Because the chip was so bad, and at the end it was a really old methodology. But does not mean that in the future, and how we are working right now with these new chips, we are having a high accuracy in the results. And it's just a matter of time, as I said, that governments are going to be approving the system, and companies are already realizing the potential that has. So this is how it works. It's absorption of the light, and I actually love it. I repeat it because it's environmentally friendly and it's quick, non-destructive. So we see that in many other industries. For example, Japan is using that technology to sell for example, mangoes, depending on the sweetness that has, no? And basically the user is gonna place the mango into like in the balance that we have, but with the NNIR, and it's gonna tell you the price according to the weight and to the sweetness. So I think it's a future that we are gonna see how consumers are gonna be able to analyze with the light, hopefully in 10 years in our phone.
Yeah. So interesting. And actually you have 4 main models that you're using with your device. One is to calculate potency of cannabinoids, but then you also have a model for the main terpenes. Now you can tell us maybe a little bit more about that. Also water activity and plant nutrition in terms of the deficiencies in the leaves and this sort of thing, no? And these you have shown some of the use cases that some companies have used that for, such as for phenohunting, running across multiple varieties, also for the timing of harvest when the potency is highest, also for as an assistant to the Q&A, of course, not for the batch release, but perhaps for some intermediate results, and then also to optimize the nutrition parameters and the cultivation methods, no, Ruben?
Exactly. So basically, 7 years ago, when we started developing the NIR models, as I said, in the University of Barcelona, we received an European grant, and then we developed a THC model, CBD model, as you were showing in the iceberg, not the most important ones. Then we actually did that because we were doing a breeding for just to try to be compliant with European law for the CBD strains. And then we focused in order to find these strains that were less than 0.2, that actually was really difficult, later on 0.6. In any case, being able to phenohunt. No? Phenohunt is, as I was saying, you have 1,000 plants on the field and being able to have any kind of system to quick identify which are the ones. No? So in the THC industry, you would like to have the higher levels usually, and in the CBD, the lower ones on the THC contents. Once we did that, we realized that actually, let's be sincere, we just copy what other industries have been using, as the tomato, as the wine, as many other ones, and then we look into, wow, can we see terpenes? Yeah, it's possible, it's difficult, but it's possible. What can we see else? We also can see the humidity and the water activity. And then basically we realized that with this technology, there is a curve of the cannabinoid that can let us know if we are able to analyze day by day without cost or extra cost, plus just the flower, which is going to be the proper time to harvest. That this is also an amazing information that we can get out of the crop in order to find which is the proper time to harvest. After that, and this is the latest model that we did, as other industries, for example, the olive industry use it a lot, the NIR for that, is to be able to know how is the nutrition into the plant. NPK, calcium, magnesium, it's possible to do it with NIR, and actually it's a super tool. I did my thesis on ICP and heavy metals, but also we've been studying a lot the nutrition. As I said before, I was working in BioBeat for 10 years. I was developing bionutrients for the cannabis industry, and we were analyzing a lot. If someone could give me that tool 10 years ago, no, 15 years ago, and instead of doing all the process of the ICP, just having a view of how the plants were absorbing nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and being able to identify the requirements of each strain and being able to perform the perfect nutrition for that, that's one of the success. So mainly companies are using it for phenohunting. That's a super tool to know which are the unicorns that you want to find, when is the proper time to harvest, and also how I feed my plants. So is there a lack of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and how I'm going to be applying that and how the plant is absorbing. So really quick, how usually companies work, and the most advanced producers in the world are the Canadian ones, and they use it a lot, the plant tissue. They pick up the leaf. It should be the real fair leaf. You send it to the lab, but you usually wait 1 week. So let's say, okay, I'm growing a plant. I'm in the 2nd week of flowering. I pick the leaf, I send it. The 3rd one is going to tell me, okay, Arnau, you have a lack in nitrogen. Oh, I'm going to apply nitrogen. So I add nitrogen. I wait 2-3 days, and then I send it. But then it's going to be the next week that I know if this is working or not. And then that's the game changer of the industry, is that if you are able to analyze day by day the nutrition into your plant, this is going to be a system that is going to have more production, a better quality, and you are going to avoid a lot of problems.
That's so interesting, Ruben. And actually, I'm very interested as well into the applications for producers and so on. But I think it's also interesting, let's say, to commoditize or to make the information more available downstream. And this slide is showing it because it's the results used with Valemberas of 3 varieties produced by Actera in Thailand and distributed by a Swiss distributor. And the 3 varieties were analyzed using the Balemberas to estimate their terpene profiles. I would first, let's say, a more broader general analysis, as Ruben was mentioning before. You mentioned there's 140 or there's a big number of terpenes, but let's say Ruben mentioned about a dozen that tend to appear. What I see usually, it's most of them tend to have myrcene, beta-caryophyllene, and limonene are the clear 3 dominant terpenes, I would say, in the varieties of cannabis. But maybe the details are also in these other smaller terpenes that can bring a more differentiated profile. So having this information, it can help you, of course, on the production process, but it can also be a tool to then in the commercialization, let's say, either to the ultimate consumer and the patient, or perhaps along the supply chain to a distributor that you really want to show him that your products really fit in their portfolio, and it's not something that they already have, but something that's differentiated and that could be a good addition to their portfolio. And this is an example. So Ruben, have you seen, well, first, and as Ruben has been mentioning as well, that there's not an official method for the terpenes, which is, of course, it's a problem, but I'm going to say it's an advantage in the sense that you can perhaps run one of these analyses and use it for these purposes without having to pay for the, a full sample COA for GMP. No, so Ruben, have you seen a lot of companies using your machine for that, more for consumer-facing data and so on?
So step by step. So basically, we start developing this this model in order to be compliant in the biggest market in the world, that is California government. As I said before, the California government asks for total THC, total CBD, total terpenes, and the 3 main ones. So basically, once we start building up this model, we realize how complex it is due to the fact that there is no ISO 17025 and a standard protocol that shows the same results in different labs. Plus, there is a paper shown by a research group in Israel that shows with Investor Unique how accurate could be NIR in terms of being able to analyze the terpenes. It's a huge challenge. It's not easy, and as I said, there are many difficulties with that. Said that, the NIR in potency, we already have many studies, and we've been dipping a lot into that. The terpenes is still something that should improve, and as I said, there is still not even an ISO 17025 protocol for that, so it's really difficult not to evaluate it. In any case, I think one of the nice histories that we've been facing, I cannot say the name, but it's one of the biggest companies in the world. We did a study in terms of being able to see, to test the products, as many other industries does. If you produce tomatoes, you want to test with 100 people, you give them 10 tomatoes and you tell them, hey, which is the tomato that you like more, which is the tomato that is more sweet. So basically this study, we took 10 strains from 50 to 30% of THC, and then actually it was tested by people that they really know about cannabis, and then suddenly 85% of them, they choose a strain that was not the highest one, but was the highest one in myrcene. And then actually we realized, wow, there is a lot to study there, no? So basically, a strain that was higher in limonene with no myrcene was 33%. People was feeling less strong than the one of 28 that was full myrcene, no? And that was like, wow, that's the point, no? So I think, I know this Swiss company, they have as well our system, and I know Org as well in Thailand. There is a way, I think, to understand that there is an entourage effect, that the terpenes, they have a lot to say, and still, if we don't have a standard protocol and the NIR could be not the best way, I always recommend GCMS for this kind of analysis in order to see these small particles. As I said, NIR is quick, is effective, but we cannot see really small components to see what's going on. At the end, super interesting. There are many companies right now that are studying the effect of the terpenes into our body and how it's going to affect. And this is, I think, one of the examples that we saw that an strain with myrcene was more strong for the consumers than other ones that did not have.
Mm-hmm. That's super interesting, actually, Ruben. Thank you for the analysis. And now I wanted to show you, we are near the end of the webinar, but some of the analysis also run by our friends at Cannalytics on terpenes on New York flower. We see that the range between the, let's say, dominant varieties between 1% and 2%, even though Ruben was mentioning that, let's say, the top tends to come at 3 or even 4%. So this is interesting, of course, total terpenes, but then I would say because they tend to clusterize so much around certain terpene profiles, that also finding differentiated profiles, and a typical one is the Jack Herer, which I think, I don't know if it's terpinolene or osimine or one of these terpenes, but it's very, very differentiated in this regard. And maybe some of its success can be estimated based on this. And here on the right, we have in New York, how do some varieties differ versus the average terpene profile of products there. And we see that GMO or ice cream cake are very much on the average, whereas others like cheetah peas, funnily enough, but also like wedding cake, which you might associate with ice cream cake, but it's still a little bit of a mystery. But I believe these questions are gonna be becoming more and more relevant as time moves on and we professionalize, and also let's say we are near the limit also in terms of THC content. So all the opportunities that we can get to differentiate our offering can have a return. No, Ruben? So what do you think is the implication of what we discussed today for product development?
So I really like how the cannabis plant works in terms of, at least what we've been studying is that living soil and bio used to have more terpenes. Okay, and someone would tell me, no, it's not true, whatever. At least this is the data that we have, but there are many factors that would be affected by the content of the terpenes. And one of the main ones is how it has been stored and how the cannabis, which are the conditions that has been stored, and it's going to affect. If you see the graphics that you were showing, and then we see some strains, the same strain could be, for example, the gelato, 0.2 and 4%, and at the end there are some that are related through the terpenes itself, but also to the strain. But I think most of it is the way that it's produced and the way that it's dry and cured, and that's the key point of the things. And basically, I think there is a huge challenge. We've been talking with companies to say, okay, we label the strain is 20. After 6 months, 1 year, how it's going to be? There's going to be a decarboxylation depending on how it's stored. But I think one of the main points is the terpenes, and the way that it's going to be stored and how it's going to be stored. So I think the challenge of the industry is being able to see, as we've been seeing with tomatoes, if this tomato is bio or not, and then finding the way and the proper way with a standard protocol to know the content of the terpenes. But in my point of view, it's really related to the strain, but most of it is the way that is produced and the way that is cured, dry, and stored.
That's so interesting. Also related to what you were mentioning before in the comparison between Chile and British Columbia. Whereas in terms of genetic material, what we have all around the world is not that different, sadly enough. I would love to have a lot of land races, but we are growing pretty much the same varieties all around the world with some differences. And however, we see a lot of differences in terms of the cannabinoids, but also in terms of the terpenes. So for instance, in these graphs, we're showing a comparison with some varieties grown in the US and grown in Colombia. And we see in the right, we have the terpene profile of these varieties. And what we see is some differences between the US and Colombia in terms of, I believe, is the limonene appears higher in the States, whereas the nerolidol appears higher in Colombia in this one grower. We should also say all the analysis of the Colombian flowers are by one lab. So this is the question that I want to pose you, Ruben. Like, is it mostly due to a difference in cultivation, you think, these results, or is it due to the lab methods that in the States or in that Colombian lab tends to weigh differently the different terpenes?
That's a super question. So mainly it's a pity to do the study and not have the same lab, which will actually answer your question. And I think the lab has a lot to say. As I was saying, we already suffered that, and labs give you different results, specifically in terpenes. But I think there is a big point, and I appreciate you mentioned that is the terroir, no? And again, coming back to the wine, no? It could be the same one in Chile that in Tarragona, no. Why? Because the earth is different, the sun is different, the water is different, and the air is different. And that's something that I think once we are going to have a mature market, we are going to face. I dream the day that I visit, I don't know, I'm in Portugal right now in Lisbon. I go to the beach, I ask for a dessert, I can have my wine, I can have anything, and then I can ask, no? And ask for my cannabis or extraction or flower, and then having this gelato and the gelato from Tarragona and the gelato from Chile. And then also having, no? And saying, oh, wow, this has more or less terpenes, that's how it's going to be. And that's true. And we know that, no? That actually the wine industry changed by the terroir. We see that, and I wish to see this in the future of the cannabis industry. So super interesting, that point, and I love it. So let's see, no, how it's going to be, what is going to be the most famous White Widow, and who is going to be the best one. For sure, talking about outdoor, I think that's one of the key points.
Amazing. So yeah, we're finishing to the end. Some of the conclusions that I get from this conversation that we had. First, of course, that THC is still very important, but we have a lot of challenges for standardizing data and getting new data, making it useful. But then that differentiation along terpene profiles is relevant, and also that some methods such as the NIR can help with some of the processes that Ruben was mentioning, from the phenohunting to the nutrition to even to helping somehow with the product analytics and the commercial front. So I don't know if Ruben, if you have any extra recap that you want to do, or we should go to some questions as well.
Just really quick one that I really love it is one of the points is that actually NIR can be run by anyone. It's so easy. You don't need all that stuff. So I think could be one of the ways in the future to be able to be a third lab validation and to validate that. The second one of that is that for most of the companies that are exporting and importing, it's impossible to have the same result once you are having the lab and send it to another lab, as we've been seeing, no, in the webinar. And I think the NIR, Valenveras, or any other tool related with the spectroscopy could be, if it has a solid model, in order to be a validation that is going to have the same value in Thailand, that is going to be the same value in Germany. And I have many clients that they use it for that reason. I think is also a good advantage. If you are releasing a budget in South Africa, the values, we've been testing a lot of the labs there, is not going to be the one that you are going to see in Germany. So think about any other way, like could be NIR and Valenveras, to see that you are going to have the same results, no, in South Africa and in Germany. And this is something that I think is also important to mention and could actually help to not have reject budgets and at the end help people and companies to have a success operation.
Absolutely. Comparing internationally is so important. And actually this webinar showed it, because we had a very diverse following. We have some people from Ecuador. We have some people from Italy that have connected. I know we had a lot of registrations from Australia. It's very late at night, but they were certainly interested. Same as in Thailand, a lot of people also from the States, from Canada, from Europe. So thank you everybody that connected. Let's try to answer just a couple of questions before moving on with our day, because we have only a couple of minutes left of our conversation. There's one, somebody is asking, we were talking at the beginning about THC inflation. You mentioned at the 70s. He mentions if it's due mostly to the grow cultivations or due to the genetics. What do you think, Ruben? What has caused
sorry, just to understand that the question is, can you repeat it, please?
Yeah, I believe he's asking if this THC inflation is mostly due to cultivation methods or due to the genetics.
Genetics. It's also related to the methodology, but basically to understand, it's genetics. So basically, if you see this graph, we are gonna see like, let's say is a phenotype and a chemotype. So at the end, you are gonna have, let's say, brothers, actually sisters that are gonna be in a curve. So if you take always the higher one, this is how we evolve. We are actually launching a system in the psilocybin world that is actually helping a lot breeding in order to right now increase the content of psilocybin in the mushrooms. And this is what we are facing. No, last year, we already has been increasing 30% from last year just with this breeding. And it's mainly for the breeding. Also, it's going to be related. It's a super good question. I love it. For sure, the way to grow is also really related, but mainly it's genetics. Yes.
It's genetics mostly. Interesting. Then somebody's asking, Ruben, what is the typical power consumption of a portable near analysis device?
So it's actually a seed charger. You can use any seed charger that you have. Is so easy to use. Actually, the hardware that you are using, the Proxy Scout, is amazing because you can run more than 500 samples with one charge. And actually, one of the things that I love from our system is that you can even run without internet. So we have many clients in Colombia that sometimes they face a lack of connection into internet. And in this case, Valdemeras is offering a system that can run without internet.
Amazing. Okay, last question before going. Ruben, Jairo's asking, would you say terpenes are the new frontier over THC?
I would say yes. And yes, for me, yes. There are more things than terpenes, and we could have another 4 webinars about all the new components that we are facing and seeing. But yes, I would say yes. Good question, Jairo. I love it.
Viva okay, Colombia. Amazing. So yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground today, but there's still plenty of topics, as Ruben was mentioning, that are still we still need to discuss. So please don't hesitate to contact us through LinkedIn, interact with this webinar. It's gonna stay uploaded, so send it to whoever you think is gonna like it. Thank you so much, Ruben, for this wonderful conversation, and look forward to the next ones.
Thank you, Arnau. It has been amazing. I really love your work. I think data is so important. I cannot wait to see your seminar in C Days that you did so good in the University of Bilbao, and I cannot wait to continue collaborating. Thank you very much for your work. Amazing.
I appreciate it. Have a nice day, everyone.
Hey, thank you.